I'm James Womack, and I'm a poet and translator based in Cambridge. I have written 3 collections of poems that have been published by Carcanet or will shortly be published. That's Misprint, which came out in 2012, On Trust, A Book of Lies, which came out in 2017, and Homunculus, which is going to come out this September, if we are spared. And I've also translated a couple of books of poems that have been published by Carcanet, as well as a couple of books of poems that have been published elsewhere, but the ones that have been published by Carcanet are a selection from the work of the Russian futurist poet Vladimir Mayakovsky, and a translation of 2 collections by the contemporary Spanish writer Manuel Vilas. And that is, I think gives a good overview of the kinds of things I'm interested in as a writer and as a translator, I think. So, contemporary poetry from across Europe, and more general sort of modernist 20s and 30s poetry, also from across Europe. That's my, you like to think that you write poems not because of academic study or because of things that you read at school, but I studied Russian at university. I studied English and Russian, a joint degree. I did a doctorate on literary translation and W.H. Auden. So that, I think, is those are the kind of sort of, triangulation points that you can use to think about, or that I do use to think about what it is that I do as a writer and the kind of things that I'm interested in. And I think that's a very, perhaps inadequate, but that's all the handle that I think is immediately necessary for thinking about the kind of things that I'm interested in. Oh, one other thing, I suppose, is that the second book I published, On Trust, A Book of Lies, was very concerned with the idea of persona. So it was a book of poems written in a number of voices that claimed to be my voice, but were deliberately not, if you see what I mean. So sort of playing with the idea of what the I of a poem might be. When a poet says, I felt this, does the I mean the poet, or does the I mean the character in the poem? And that's something that I think is not a particularly sophisticated question, perhaps, but it's one that I keep on thinking about, and one that I investigate a bit further in Homunculus, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But that, I think, is more or less who I am and what I do. So the next, where's my favourite place to work? What you see in this video is a hastily curated background to give some impression of a wider and more interesting cultural and interior life than I actually have. I work in this room. It's the conservatory at the back of our house. It's very, very hot in the summer. It's very, very cold in the winter. Today it is absolutely perfect because we just had a thunderstorm last night to clear the air. But I don't know that I'd say this is necessarily my favourite place to work because of those factors. I think I can work, you'll see in the background my 8-year-old son's guitar. If you listen very carefully at various points in this video, you may hear the screaming of my 3-month-old daughter as she asks for food or comfort or various kinds of various kinds of interaction or support. So there are a lot of distractions, and I don't think this place is ideal, but the good thing about it is it does have a door that shuts. But as far as my favourite place to work is concerned, I don't know that I necessarily have one. I think, I am more or less okay at dealing with distractions. I'm more or less okay at writing in various, changed circumstances. I don't think the circumstances matter a lot to me. I will say one thing though, which is that I miss very much going to cafes. I work in the University of Cambridge, and I am tangentially affiliated to a college, and I miss very much being able to go and sit in the quiet bits of my college and sit in a garden and write and so on. I think you see behind me, I am very, very lucky that I have a garden space and that it is quite quiet. But actually, other garden spaces that I don't have to feel responsible for are probably the place where I get most of my thinking done, or most of my preparing for writing done. So when they were open, the Botanic Gardens in Cambridge, or like I say, the gardens in my college when they were open. And I found during the lockdown that I've been running away. I mean, this is before the birth of my child, so there's the birth of my daughter, so there's sort of other reasons for running away. I've been running away on long bike rides and so on to get out of Cambridge, to get somewhere that seems a little bit less mediated, perhaps. So maybe that's the answer to that question, that my favourite place to work, or at least the place where I work best, is a place where I can imagine myself to be the only person, the only human figure in it, which says something about me, perhaps my antisocial tendencies. But here I have a door that shuts, walls, a roof that now doesn't leak after we got the roof fixed, and that is enough, really. My favourite place to work, the place that I work best, any place that will have me, perhaps. Next question: what was the last book you read that blew me away? This was quite a difficult question to think about, because I think one of my weaknesses, or maybe one of the things that one of the things I spend a lot of time doing is reading. One of the things I'm very willing to have happen to me is to be blown away by a book, to be kind of overwhelmed by it. And I spent quite a long time sort of going back over the list of things that I've read this year and kind of vacillating and thinking, what's really kind of astounded me. And I think that the answer is that I'm very easily astounded. So the answer for today, for this particular video, is this book, that which is a collection of poems by the Spanish poet Leopoldo Maria Panero, who spent quite a lot of time either officially diagnosed as mentally ill, or living up to the perception of him as a cursed poet, a poet maudit. And he writes long, intricate, very physical poems of, blood and semen and death and desire, and with a sort of occult flavouring to them every now and then. And I hadn't really read his work beforehand, before the last few days, and I've just been charging through this book, and it's been astounding me. And as a translator, I've felt that there are a lot of things that I want to go back to and pick up on and try to present in English if I can. So that's, I think he's a really amazing writer. But then going back over the list of things I've read this year, like I say, I was finding things that were amazing all the time. I mean, I hadn't read until the beginning of the lockdown, I hadn't read anything by Raymond Chandler, and I've read his 2 big anthologies of his novels over the lockdown, and he blew me away. Voice, I think, that blows me away. I mean, that's the thing that gets to me. I think if there's something you can get a hook into, or something can get a hook into you, something that sounds like somebody speaking or sounds like somebody writing, but somebody who's not like anybody else, I think that really affects me as a reader. And again, I mean, to bring this back to myself, maybe is the kind of thing I want to do as a writer. And now I'll talk a little bit about the book. How did it feel putting this new selection together is the question. It's not a selection, it's putting this collection together. It's a homunculus. This book is a long poem, divided into 6 sections, based on, and I have a bit of an issue with this, because I don't quite know whether to say that it's a translation or it's based on a long Latin poem by a man called Maximian, or Maximianus, who is thought of as the last Roman poet. So he was writing in the 6th century AD, after the absolute and final collapse of the Western Roman Empire. So when this territory that used to be the Roman Empire was run by, I think, the Ostrogoths, and the barbarians had definitively conquered the city, and he conquered the empire in this particular environment where everything is falling to pieces, all his certainties are ruined. He chooses to write about growing old and sex and love, and the way that love fades over time, and the memory of physical love, the memory of sex, is something that can console you, but actually is painful and harmful. And I was led to this by some of my reading. I mean, picking up on little hooks and so on that led me here, and was, to coin a phrase, blown away by it. And thought that I had to do something with it. But I don't. I'd be the first person to say that I don't think that I'm a good or competent translator from Latin. I can with, I've got a addiction to those little red lower books where you have the Latin on one side and the English on another, and you can read it and think, oh yeah, I know Latin, because you're reading the English and the Latin's kind of there. But I had a translation of it. I found a translation with a parallel text. I found a Latin text. I found a French text, and I started to work on formulating some kind of very free translation of this incredible, sad, angry, sort of disgusting, disgusted and despairing poem. And this is what happened. So that's how I got into writing it, or how it ended up. How I started writing it. And the next thing is, the final question is, if I have a favourite piece in this book. And it's a long poem. It's divided into 6 sections because that's classically how it was done. And you can see that each of the sections tells a particular story. There's the first half of the book is is one poem, or maybe just over the first half. I think it's about 30, 40 pages in the book as Carcanet is publishing it, and then the rest of it are little anecdotes from the poet's life, which again gives me a chance to do this investigation of whether the eye of the poem can escape from being thought to be the eye of the poet. And so I do have favourite bits, but I find it very difficult to pull them out of context. But I will just read one section which comes from the second part of the poem, so the second elegy. And this shows Maximian saying that, talking to the woman that he's been in love with, and she said she doesn't love him anymore, and he's trying to work out what this means. And I quite like this section. I'll just read that, and that'll be the end of this video. She came to my life like a purifying flame, and burnt everything down, herself included. And as I pick through the white ash of my self-respect and of our years together, there are still dangerous points where her beauty flares once again and dazzles. An argument in favour of generous time whom I hate, who always seems to knock my most precious ornaments to the floor. Even you, clumsy time, make the effort to save some trinkets from being crushed or broken. Not everything has to die, not entirely. But did this flesh mean it all to you? Were you beholden to this flesh? Was this flesh what you only loved? For this flesh will be gone, and you will see it go and gone, if you are lucky. Young men have their memories to keep them warm, the inexhaustible blanket of their memories, homegrown erotica or just more innocent stuff. The afternoon when you and she first discovered the city together, alleys you saw once only, the comically bitter coffee as you hid from the rain, and then, again, the sun. Is that a rainbow? As you pondered whether or not to take her hand. No matter how appalling the present might be, the past can be glorious, unclouded, and happy. I stand and scream silently into the mirror. And on that cheerful note, I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your attention and time.